U.S. President Joe Biden is set to land in Ottawa this week. It will be his first visit to Canada as Commander-in-Chief, and it comes just before the Liberal government tables its much-anticipated budget. Businesses are calling on the Prime Minister to answer Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, which offers massive subsidies and incentives for investment in the U.S. economy. Maryscott Greenwood is CEO at the Canadian American Business Council. She's in Washington. Scotty, good to talk to you again.
Good to talk to you, David. Thanks for having me.
I'd like to start with a competitive challenge presented by the U.S. embarking on this massive series of green tech and high-tech subsidies, which Ottawa, it really just can't answer dollar for dollar. So with the budget coming next week, what do you think the path forward is for Canada on this?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. First of all, David, I think it's important that the U.S. and Canada figure out ways to compete together vis-a-vis our competitors around the world. So when there's a new factory that's announced in Canada, that benefits the North American ecosystem, and likewise down here. But that having been said, if you're not going to compete dollar for dollar, then you do deal by deal. Or better yet, you give some permitting certainty on things like critical minerals development, which is important in the energy transition, and that in and of itself will attract a lot of capital. So Canada has tools in its toolbox.
Okay, the permitting thing, I just want to touch on that because Canada is trying to play up its future role as a key supplier of critical minerals. So do you expect this to be discussed with Biden? And how much do you think sort of our slow pace of approval for some of the key projects, the natural resource projects in this country could be an issue in those conversations?
I do think it'll be raised. I don't know if the pace of approval will be raised as much as the idea that we should cooperate together. The pace of approval, though, is something that's quite real because Canada has world-class standards on sustainability, on collaboration with Indigenous people and First Nations. Canada really knows how to do this, but it doesn't know how to do it fast enough, or not that it doesn't know how. So far hasn't been willing to do these big infrastructure projects fast enough, and that will be a competitive disadvantage to Canada vis-a-vis countries like Australia, who would absolutely love to grab a big piece of the U.S. market also. So I don't know if the leaders will discuss the pace. I do think they will discuss critical minerals and collaboration on the development and the transition to a mineral economy. So I think that'll come up. And then the pace is just something that has to happen. Otherwise, Canada's going to get left in the dust.
You know, a lot of the reasons provided for that slow pace sometimes are environmental concerns, Indigenous rights, of course, provincial federal jurisdiction overlap, these sorts of challenges. With this window to compete on the critical mineral transition, how does Canada, accelerate that process without trampling all over those other key priorities?
Well, you don't want to trample on those at all. You want to keep your world-class regulations, and you want to keep that collaboration. But where there's a will, there's a way. We saw that during the development of vaccines that used to take 10 years, and then we have a global pandemic, and we got vaccines within 2 years. So that was because there was an urgent need, there was political will, and there was amazing collaboration between the public and the private sectors. And that's what this will take too. It'll just be important for people to seize the moment and see this as a big opportunity. And I think we can get there, but it's going to be hard.
You mentioned that we can't compete dollar for dollar, so we have to go deal by deal. As you say, we've already seen a couple of major investments in electric vehicle battery manufacturing plants here in Canada, in St. Thomas and in Windsor. Do you take that as an encouraging sign that even if Canada can't match the subsidies in the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, it can compete for these sort of mega projects?
Absolutely. I think these projects are really important. The other one that you didn't mention that I think Canada could lead the way on is recycling. We need to not just think about the beginning and end, digging it out of the dirt and then through the end of life, but we need to think about how you return these critical minerals into the supply chain, and so that you have more of a circular approach instead of a cradle to grave approach. And I think Canada could lead the way on that.
So when you look at the plan that was laid out at the North American Leaders Summit in Mexico City on this continental supply chain, sort of really talking the language of the friendshoring trend that's happening, where do you see Canada really fitting into this, in terms of critical minerals to the North American green economy supply chains? Do you see the U.S. and Mexico relying heavily on Canada in the future, or is it too early to tell exactly where that goes?
Canada's in the catbird seat. Canada has the engineering expertise. It has the infrastructure with its ports and its rails. It has the human capacity. It has the environmental standards. So Canada really is in the catbird seat. But again, what Canada needs to do is figure out how to do things way more quickly than it does now. And that will be the determining factor in whether or not Canada remains in the catbird seat and starts to lead the world in this, or whether it's displaced by other friendly but less proximate countries.
So, expectations get raised in the run-up to something like this. I mean, it's a working visit by a head of state. It's not a state visit for people keeping track at home. When the two leaders speak and announce whatever the deliverables are, to use the language of these sorts of gatherings, what does success look like for you on this economic agenda front? What do you want to see from President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau on Friday?
Well, success is them getting together in a bilateral context. So that's good. They see each other at world meetings a lot. But the fact that the president is coming to Canada is quite significant. It causes the entire bureaucracy of the United States to basically stop whatever it's doing and focus on Canada. That's a positive. So I think what the U.S. will want to do is continue to reassure the world that we are a good partner and to underscore the importance of democracies, freedom-loving people in the contest with autocracies and with aggressive people like Russia that are engaging in war with their neighbors. So I think that drawing those contrasts on the world stage is a perfect moment for the U.S. and Canada, and I think that's what the U.S. will try to do.
Okay, Scotty, thank you so much. That's Maryscott Greenwood, the CEO at the Canadian American Business Council.